Very generous introduction by Rob. Look, I'm going to get on with it because I want to talk about quite a lot in a very short time. The whole thing about placemaking is just about creating places where people want to be. It's quite simple, really. And in the context of Macquarie Park, if I went around the room and go, there's probably quite a few employers or people who are actually responsible for engaging people to come to this precinct or this area to want to work. But how many of you have been confronted in your own organisations where people are saying, no, I don't want to work there. I'd like to be in the Sydney CBD, or I want to be in North Sydney, I might want to be in Parramatta, or actually I don't want to come to Sydney. Quite happy in Melbourne, Brisbane, or Copenhagen, or New York. Because that's the reality. We are creating these places for people to actually want to change their lives. Whether in the context of today, we're talking about commercial office environments, R&D, and spaces where people are, 9 to 5. But the reality is that Macquarie Park is much bigger than that. Whether we're looking at the university or the residential development, the shopping centre itself, and so many of the other spaces. So I better get on with this. Right now, when I think about Macquarie Park, it's not about saying, let's be kumbaya and talk about how amazing it can be. Because, yeah, it'll get there, but it's going to take decades. Like, we look at what it is today and where we would all like it to be, it is not going to happen overnight. There is so much work to do and there's so far to go to get to the ideal. And so what I want to do today is just throw out some really quick ideas to go, how do we actually do short-term solutions? What's the low-hanging fruit? How do we think about this to actually create spaces that are going to incrementally and in some cases dramatically change that experience for people to want to work here, want to be here, want to come here, and want to actually invest in developing a much more fulfilled environment. I'm not going to give you the traditional welcome to country, it's up on the screen, but what I am going to say is that New Zealand, for as long as I can remember, has been kicking our ass in actually engaging with First Nations. And Australia is doing quite a good job of playing a bit of catch up, but we are obviously a long way behind. And in my most recent book, The Place Economy, we did a 60-page section on let's go a little bit beyond just, tokenism. Let's go beyond a bit of landscaping and a bit of public art. How are we actually creating jobs people in First Nations or Aboriginal people? What are we doing to actually incubate opportunities for them to ideate the future? And how can Macquarie Park play a role in that? Because if you start to solve that question, then you're actually doing something far more than we're seeing in other parts of Australia. And I should mention that we're working on about 7 or 8 innovation precincts in Australia alone, let alone Asia. So we see it up front in terms of what's really happening on the ground. I'm not going to sort of talk about us as a business too much, except to say that here are a couple of examples of some of those precincts that we're doing around Queensland, Victoria, New Zealand, and in other countries. And so these precincts are best from an innovation point of view when they speak directly to a category of service or industry. In this case of Townsville, we're actually looking specifically at innovation and sciences around sort of the ocean and sort of solutions specifically in a particular realm. We've been doing some work around Macquarie Park for a number of different organisations, but it is really about transforming, and in this case one in Auckland where it was a shopping centre, but we've actually turned it into a holistic suburb with residential, schools, businesses, commercial, everything that can actually expand it from being just a shopping centre to be something far more meaningful. And I think that there are some interesting similarities with Macquarie Park. So this book series we've produced over the last 10 years called The Place Economy really gets to the heart of understanding how are we creating places people want to be? How are we looking at all different asset classes and sectors to create economic impact, but for societal well-being? Actually residential livability, desirability, and actually transforming cities, suburbs, towns and developments. And so to do that, it means we've actually talked and visited people all around the world. And this snapshot, it just represents some of the 100 or so stories in our latest 700-page book. So we've actually gone and actually spoken to people or done case studies in around 45 countries. So the point of this is that by actually speaking to people, you start to understand around the world that there are certain human traits that are consistent with regard to what we want as experiences, what we want for our families, how we want education to play a key role, why public transport is actually absolutely critical in anything we do anywhere. How Australia, interestingly, is incredibly progressive and we're doing a lot well that we should be proud of, but yet there is opportunity everywhere. And yes, in some cases we're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments, but in some cases we're not. And I think if we look at Macquarie Park right now, there is so much we can do that doesn't necessarily require the big, deep pockets. So we start to think about, well, where are we right now? We're talking about, this future of Macquarie Park, towers everywhere, density done well, public spaces, public transport. And, we start to think, wow, this is quite an exciting future of what Macquarie Park could be. But this is where we are today. And I'd say that the gap between where we would like to be or where we see ourselves being and where we are today is quite a long way away. We're not saying, don't worry, we'll be there in 2 or 3 years. We're not even saying we'll be there in 10 years. I don't know what that picture is, but maybe it's more like 20 or 25 years. And while I think it's exciting to talk about aspiration, the reality is that for the most part, when we talk to people on the ground, they don't give a shit, right? They're like, all right, no. I'm an employee here, I'm a student here, I might even be a resident here. I care about the next 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years. Beyond that, you've totally lost me. And even then, what can you do for me right now? How can you change my experience? How can you improve it? If you ask people, do you like walking around Macquarie Park? They go, no, I don't. The footpaths aren't done well. It's not engaging. It's not dynamic. The landscaping is poor. We've transferred from a lot of light industrial to some commercial. Everything is disconnected and displaced. There are great things happening, but there could be a whole lot more. And my personal point of view, I'm certainly not speaking officially at all, but I'm like, it's too big. I don't want to talk about all the way down to Ryde. I don't want to talk about way past the university up north. I'm like, my personal view is we need to concentrate on a condensed version of what that future aspiration is. If we actually focus on a whole lot less, we can probably do a whole lot more. And actually, in achieving that quicker, in a more dynamic fashion, I believe we can actually get people to come on board the journey with us and see that big opportunity to actually be participants, investors, developers, residents, and tenants. So I guess my view, and clearly I'm pretty biased, is that placemaking can play a really critical role in actually helping deliver that, both short and long term. And so we need to start thinking about what are those strategies and who are those key players. Yes, it can be state government, local council, it can be the existing asset owners, it can also be the tenants. There are so many different people in this room right now who have the ability to influence what happens next and how fast it happens and what the quality of that experience could potentially be. And so I only wrote this talk in the last couple of days, so I've kind of mapped out, this is just my personal point of view, whether it was 2 or 3 or 100. I came up with 9 things that I would like to see occur and that I think are very possible in terms of what role many of you in this room could play to help that evolution occur more quickly and at a higher level of quality. This first one's very simple, this idea of smart growth and creating a true mixed-use precinct. There's been a lot of debate about, hold on, isn't this a commercial precinct and a university? What the hell is residential doing here? My view is that you always have to have residential. It's about where you place it. And right now on the outskirts of both sides actually is going to work really well. And in fact, my view is more the better. The more asset classes, the better. The more typologies, the better. The more we have build to sell, build to rent, co-living, student accommodation, bring it on, I say. Because unless you have that, you will not have an innovation precinct. You will just have a very boring place that exists 9 to 5, Tuesday to Thursday, 3 days a week. It's really not compelling, it's not destinational, and it's not a place that people would aspire to want to spend their lives working in, let alone living in. So we need to change that. We need to think more about this idea of light industrial, residential, commercial office, retail, hotels and universities coexisting, because the more asset classes we have here, the more powerful, destinational and buoyant it will become, because we're spreading our wings and engaging more sectors. We can still be very specific about engaging tenancies and organisations within certain sectors, whether it's pharmaceutical, technology, and IT. Those things are incredibly important to the kind of DNA of what will differentiate Macquarie Park from many of those other innovation precincts around Asia Pacific. The gift of Sydney. Someone in my team, Tom, said, I think that the Metro is the single most exciting that's happened to Sydney since the Olympics. The impact that it's already had in terms of people using public transport, people actually getting across Sydney more, looking at values of assets, landlords rethinking, what it is they have at their disposal in certain stops. The impact of the Metro is profound. And I'd love to think that it'll start to get people thinking more progressively about how incredibly important public transport is to the ecosystem of our city, not just in Sydney, but Australia-wide, and fast rail between major cities. So we can actually have more of this quicker, because it is critical to engaging and allowing people to have equity and thinking more about investment of our future. Little things that we could do. Imagine if we just had a sort of bus system that took you all the way up to Lane Cove Road, and it just did a constant loop. It was a Macquarie Park bus. It was a free bus, but it's just constant. You're going to walk out and go, oh, I'd normally drive there. No, I should get the Metro. Oh, but it's a 10-minute walk. I don't really want to walk. It's too hot. And plus the footpaths suck. But if I wait, the worst case scenario is it's 15 minutes, but maybe it's 3 minutes and I'll just jump on the loop bus. Simple things, a branded loop bus. You start to really kind of experience that kind of connection of where you can get people using more of the precinct. This idea of livability really does come down to permeability, engagement, the ability to sort of think about our ground plane, our public realm. The reality is that all the money's made on level 1 and up. That's where the asset value is. But the brand is on the ground level. The brand is really about what you touch. It's not about a logo. It's about the way that you engage with the public realm, the way you bump into neighbours, the way that you walk down the street and you see other people. And that means we need better and more green spaces, because apart from the university, Macquarie Park sucks when it comes to green spaces or kind of permeable, engaging, experiential spaces. Walkability is incredibly poor, and there's not enough convenience. And one enormous shopping centre does not make for convenience. We could do really better things about, signage systems, but not just signage that says it's that way, but signage that engages, inspires, and tells stories. Signage that actually makes you feel, I'm somewhere important. I'm somewhere that matters. I've made a really good decision about being an employee here or moving my business here. This is where the action is. And there are so many small ways that you can do that. It doesn't matter who you speak to or where you go. You say, what do you love about your place? We go, I just kind of love the personality. I love bumping into people. I love that it's always kind of buoyant and busy and bustling. What else do you love? I love the cafes or where I eat or, little places, small owner-operator businesses. We don't have anywhere near enough of that in this broader area. The idea that we could actually have more F&B, that actually developments aren't just boxes for people to work at 9 to 5, Tuesday to Thursday, but actually that they would be places that people would actually go out of their way to visit because they have, a great tenant, great food, great drinks. And then maybe people would start to come to work Monday to Friday, because we really need a whole lot more of that. We could actually do, I don't like talking about activations because people think placemaking is about activations, and it's not. It's just a very tiny component after the fact. But actually the reality is, and if I'm talking about low-hanging fruit, here's an area that could do with some activations. Here's an area that could do with some pop-ups. Here's an area that could do with seasonality in terms of different experiences at different times of year in different places. A program of activities and events that actually make people think more about what is in front of them. To revitalise the commercial spaces that we have around this broader precinct is something that's been occurring and will continue to occur. Now, M Park is a phenomenal, monstrous, development by Stockland. And good on them, they've got the first one out of the ground, and they've got their massive data centre, which will hopefully in future be completely hidden by the future development that arrives. I'll come back to that. We've got Fraser's and Winton, doing Macquarie Exchange, which will be amazing on completion. John Holland doing their Macquarie Park around the corner. These 3 privately owned commercial developments will be instrumental in transforming Macquarie Park when they're done, which we don't know because COVID has stuffed us, because any kind of business plan that existed in 2019 is, sitting in a waste paper basket. And it's no one's fault, it's just the reality of the world that we live in and the COVID that's occurred. But anything we can do to see those developments actually engage future tenants, bring more organisations to this precinct, actually get pre-commits so they can actually go ahead and construct is what needs to occur. Because the interesting thing about those three commercial developments is they all have plans for great F&B, permeability, public realm and green space. They're great examples of what it is that we need and want, but they're not there yet. Bits of them are, but it's not enough, and it's not tying it together. So we desperately need those three developments to come to fruition and a heap more like them. We need to think more about this idea of how we are engaging organisations, tenants and companies to come from other countries, let alone other parts of Australia, to call this their home, because the sectors that are actually so focused on in this area are being supported. So that means we've got to think about this kind of ground plane, this sort of dynamism, this activation. We've got to think about all the coolest places that we go to around Sydney and go, why couldn't we have them here? We absolutely could. They're not even expensive. They just need to be considered and thoughtful in terms of the way that we are designing these future spaces, whether it's for students, workers, or the surrounding residents, because they're all customers and they're all people who want connection. And so if we think more about how do we actually promote this idea of active lifestyle, we want people who are working in our organisations to actually be healthy, to be engaged, to be outdoors. Yes, they're at work and they're being productive and they're, doing what an organisation needs them to do. But if we want people to really, we want the best people, right? And the only way to get the best people is to give them the best experience. You're not going to be able to attract and retain talent if where they go to work they hate, they dislike, or they find boring. The only way that you attract and retain is to give them an experience beyond your own office, but in the realm, in the area that they work in, for them to say, I love being here. I tell my friends, I'm proud of this environment. So it means that as you go around the precinct, there are just gaps everywhere. And yes, someone owns them. But just because someone owns them, it doesn't mean that someone's going to do anything about it. For many of them, they own those spaces, but they'll land bank them, or they don't care that they're not being used, or yeah, there's just a bunch of grass doing nothing, unkept. There are so many spaces that actually they're like broken teeth around this precinct that could be filled with activations, inexpensive solutions and ways to engage people to make them feel that they're being considered. And those things can actually be quite varied. They can be all sorts of different experiences. They can do different things for different people at different ages and different walks of life, because we need to be considering everyone. There is a matrix of users, and it's not just about people in one corner or one quadrant. It's about all of them. And so we also need to be thinking about the surrounding residential, because they're really important stakeholders here too. Yes, I think we should be supporting more residential development without a doubt, but I think we should be supporting the residents themselves, and that in these precincts that are considered just commercial, we can actually be doing things that actually engage and promote more of a 7-day economy, more of a 7-day activated area. I mean, think about any place that you love. Is it only good from Monday to Friday? No, because it's probably not a good place. Good places are good 7 days a week, not just Tuesday to Thursday. And I think when I look around the precinct, it's really important to celebrate and support and promote those critical industries that have made Macquarie Park what it is today. And so I pointed out pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, and electronics as just 3 examples. What if, and I just made this in AI, but I was like, make sculpture. I was just making a bunch of sculptures. And I'm like, what if we just had these enormous sculptures around Macquarie Park? These pieces of public art that were like, well, you couldn't drive past them without wanting to slow down and take a photo of it and put it on Instagram. These kind of Insta places that actually would become known, that would actually create vibrancy, but also support and celebrate industries that have underpinned and actually made this precinct what it is, but also what it can be. And so I think leadership is incredibly important in both this event and this organisation. Thank you for inviting me, Davor. But Macquarie University are desperate to actually see more of this sort of articulation through organisations and through more collaboration. And I think life sciences, and I know we've got Karaba here, they'll be talking a bit about this in their next session, who are leading with a number of other organisations this particular sector's development. But I think we need to be thinking more about how do we support that? How do we think more about that, not just as an industry, but as a benchmark that actually should be seen as a piece of theatre that people want to see, they want to understand, they want to engage with, they want to actually understand the impact that it's having societally, because it's more than just the outcomes. The process in itself is something that can actually get the general public excited about what it is delivering as an end solution. This idea of collaboration for me is as much about, getting into the university, cross-pollination between business and the university, and getting students out of the university and into business. More events, more sort of activation between enterprises and organisations. The fact that we could be doing more in this broader precinct with spaces, events, conferences. We should be actually inviting more of Sydney to here rather than all of you getting in your cars and going to the CBD. And so part of that is about this idea of collaborative leadership in terms of delivering that transformation. I was thinking a lot about, at the end of the day, who owns it has the power. And who owns it? Stockland and Goodman. They kind of own Macquarie Park, really. If you actually got all the assets around this entire thing, and apart from the university, and you package them up, you go, those two companies have all the power, because they own all the land, they are the biggest landlords, they've been here the longest, and they'll continue to be here the longest. So why do I kind of point them out? Because they're the big dogs. And it's all good and fine to do little sprinkles around the edges. But unless you're engaging the big dogs, unless you're actually collaborating, unless you're actually figuring out how you can work together, you're never really going to get there. It's still going to be piecemeal. It's still going to be, risk mitigation of, well, we'll put that back another 5 years. We'll put that stage back another 10 years. We've got to stop putting things back. We've got to figure out how to think more commercially and how to bring things forward. And so part of that also means that we need a nighttime economy. Who anyone here has gone anywhere and gone, I love that place, but it sucked at night. Nowhere good sucks at night, but this sucks at night, right? And I can talk about all the things that I believe a nighttime economy should have. You go, oh, they're at the shopping mall. Yeah, okay, that's not the solution. A shopping mall is never a solution. And I've asked a whole bunch of people in recent days, where do you go after work? And they go, we leave. Where do you go and hang out? We don't. We leave. And I'm like, God, whether it's a microbrewery or a big venue, or no one sticks around in numbers to kind of hang out with their colleagues and actually, celebrate someone's birthday. You leave. And that's an indictment on itself. And it's a really simple thing that one of the landlords sitting in this room could go, actually, we could build something on our site. We could actually have that tenancy on our site. You could do great things like look at how many car parks. They go on and on and on, and there are hundreds of them. Imagine doing like nighttime cinemas, just like, I don't know, it might be twice a year, but imagine how many people would come. It'd be on the calendar. It'd be like a really cool thing to participate in. I did this in AI as well. Imagine if we actually thought differently about engaging the nighttime economy by actually having lighting, by actually having really good wayfinding, by actually making the spaces feel safe. Because that's what we need to do to create a place that people want to be. My second last point is on data centers. Now, while they're probably one of the most successful asset categories in the property industry right now, I mean, AirTrunk didn't sell a few months ago for $24 billion for no reason. Next DC is, going bananas. Stockland's doing a lot more data centers. In fact, the single biggest development to happen for years in this area is a data center. And some of the biggest buildings in the whole area are data centers. And the council has approved another 4 or 5 data centers. Data centers, and this is a photo just around the corner. Data centers are wrapped in barbed wire and high fences that look like you're going to be impaled. They are the closest thing that we have in a commercial office environment to a prison. Now, I'm not saying that they're not important and we don't need them, we do. But data centers don't always necessarily belong in a place like this. If it were up to me, they wouldn't be here at all. But clearly, I don't make those decisions. And I can see the value that they are bringing. Like an organisation like Stockland is able to go ahead with MPark because the financial success of the data centre has enabled them to do that and progress those other commercial office developments. So they play a role. But if they've got to be so ugly and so in our face and so everywhere, can't council say, oh, if you're doing a data centre, we want it surrounded with public art, we want murals on it, we want green on the roof, we want beautiful landscaping surrounded. Yes, okay, this is security issues. You're going to surround them with cameras and barbed wire and electric fences. Can at least you hide those so the people who attempt to jump over them are being electrocuted, without us having to watch them? And so if we do these things, if we actually think about beautification, if we actually think about experience, and we acknowledge that while data centers might not be everyone's desire for one of the most dominant asset classes in this area, can we at least make them nicer and hide them wherever possible? My last point is really about the brand. What's Macquarie Park's brand? Doesn't have one. It should. Macquarie Park should be a known place, a known entity, a brand that has its own DNA, that people understand what experience they should expect to receive when they come here. Imagine if there was a really compelling, dynamic Macquarie Park brand that everyone recognised. And in fact, you spent not a lot of money, but you put flagpoles down every major street throughout all of Macquarie Park, and you just wrapped them in banners. That when you got here from another suburb or you got out of the metro, whoa, I'm here. I know I'm here. Now, they might change with seasons or events, but you knew you were in Macquarie Park. What a bit of low-hanging fruit from a cost point of view to make people feel, I've arrived. And so my little sort of summary of this is that the most successful precincts address experience gaps. They create walkable connections and they have a nighttime economy. And by considering the needs of both workers and residents, the area and students, the area can become magnetic. And by delivering the right place-based ideas, Macquarie Park can have a much stronger positive economic and social impact, delivering higher commercial values for investors and landlords in the process. Thank you.